We're going to go through some of the crossover assembly, and this is the first time I've ever videoed this close up, and we're going to see how this works. Here I have the parts laid out and connected. This group of parts is not connected, but it's very simple the way this thing is going to work. I drew out the schematic here so you can see it. I don't have the values written on them. You're going to have to buy the kit to actually know what the values are. The tweeter circuit's 3 parts: a resistor, a cap, and a resistor and shunt. So it looks just like this right here. I've connected the parts. As you can see, it looks just like the wiring diagram if you were to look at it like this. That's all there is to it. Whenever we've got a part that's in line like this, I like to run them so that they're in line. When I'm going to be wiring something off of it, so I'm going to be connecting a wire to it here, I like to wire it a little differently so I can twist that wire onto it and solder it on, and I've got a way to slide heat shrink down on it and seal it. I don't need to heat shrink any of this or seal it. These are all 10 connections, so no worries there. The woofer section has 3 parts also. It's very simple. There's a little notch filter there in the single part. That's all there is to it right there. If you're looking at it like on the paper, it would look a little like this. We've got the inductor here at the top, and then the notch filter coming off it. Again, this is going to be the input side right here. The positive wire going to the driver is going to come off right here. You can really bend and shape these any way you want. The main thing you want to know is when you mount this, you don't want these facing the same directions. You don't want them to be like this. You don't want them to be like this because the fields interact with each other and cause problems. You want the little one to be the one stand up on its end because it's a lot smaller and it's easier to stand up on its end. And you want it to where if it were to roll, it would roll away from or into the large inductor. That's the orientation that you want to put them in whenever you put these things together. And again, these are just twisted together. I twist them in a continuous line whenever I want them to be in a continuous line, whenever there's nothing else connecting to it. Whenever we've got a wire coming off of it, I tend to want to twist them together so that they've got another spot for me to solder onto. If this connection was made like these, then when I twisted my wire to it, I wouldn't be able to slide heat shrink on and seal the whole connection. So I like doing it this way. And this is real easy to do. So I've got this configured. I've got them in the orientation that I want them in. This is the input over here. And then I'm going to take the tweeter circuit, I'm going to kind of put it around it, and I'm going to connect it at this end over here, and this is going to be the input end. I'll take some pliers in a minute and get that twisted together nice and tight. And this is my layout of the parts. So I look at it and I need about a little board made that's about 4 inches by 6.5 inches. So I'll go cut 2 boards, one for each circuit here, 4 inches by 6.5 inches, and then we'll go into phase 2. What I like to do is I like to lay this one out that I've twisted together on the board and mark all the spots on it where I want to put zip ties. And then I'll go take the boards and drill both boards together at the same time, and then all the holes are the same. And then I'll use the second board to lay out the parts on the second crossover. Rather than if I start twisting all these together, if they're a little off, then maybe the holes won't line up where I'm going to put all my zip ties. So in order to make them exactly the same, I drill all the holes at the same time, drilling straight through all the boards, and then they're identical. So one gets assembled first, and then the second one will get assembled after we do the boards. And the boards are going to be real easy to make. I'm going to go out in the shop and cut some boards. Okay, I'm still experimenting a little here with this close-up videoing. I hope this works out okay. I hope everyone can see everything all right. I just went out to the shop and just chopped up some boards there out of some scrap 1/4 inch MDF that I have laying around. I think it's 1/4 inch. Yeah, 1/4 inch. And so here's what we do. We figured out how big the board needs to be. Now what we want to do is set the parts on the board and line them up where we want them to be. Once we get them kind of all lined up where we want it to be, then we're going to go in and we're going to mark it. And we're going to mark it in a couple of ways. We're going to mark it where I want a zip tie. Like say I want a zip tie to go around this capacitor. So I'll put a mark on each side of it. That's where I'm going to drill the hole there for that. Same with this one. I may just drill a hole there and I'll wrap it around the outside. Same here. So I'm just having to drill one hole, and I'll do the same on this one. So there are my marks for those. And on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 holes, one on each side here, so that I've got 2 zip tie straps holding this one down. And this one I'll probably do 3. So I'll do one here and here, here and here, and there and there. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to mark it in a different way. You could use a pencil, you can use whatever you want, but I'm going to mark some little X's here in spots where I want to make some holes for screws that will allow this to be mounted in the floor of the enclosure. So I'm making a few marks here, kind of just away from everything. A little network like this, 4 screws will hold it all. So basically there's what I'm going to go and drill. I'll stack these things up and I'll drill all those holes, and then I'll be ready for the next phase. Alright, back to crossover assembly. I had a group of these boards that I cut that I showed you earlier, and we marked all the spots on the boards. And then what I did was took it back there in the back and drilled those holes that I had marked. And some of the holes I drilled for mounting screws that are going to go here. And I took a little handheld grinder with a little sanding stone on it and ran it down through those a little deeper, so that it'd give the screw a little something to bite against there into that recess. I also touched the surface of each hole just a little bit to knock the edge off, and on the back side I touched it a little heavier to kind of round those edges off a little bit, so that when the zip ties run through from one hole to the other, it's not pulled tight against a sharp edge. So pretty simple stuff, really. You watch me mark everything, nothing to it. Drilling the holes. Next, what we'll do is we'll mount the crossover to it. This was the woofer circuit. It's just going to mount to it just like that. All those holes line up where we marked them. Zip tie all that to it. The tweeter circuit will go here. All those holes are all lined up. But before I get to that, before I mount this thing, what I like to do sometimes is kind of pretty things up a little bit. And when I do that, I like to whip out this stuff. It's called Duratex, and we sell this stuff by the pint or by the quart. And it's a black gooey substance that is very similar to what you think of as putting in a truck bed liner. It's super durable. It's easy to apply. Just roll it on. I'm just doing the outside edges first. And then this is the top of it. And first thing you want to do is just get a little bit of it on there. And then just kind of smear it around. It gives it a little bit of a textured finish, and it's really, really durable. If you want later, you can paint on top of it. One of the things I like to do is to take crunched up plastic bags and press that down into it, and it gives it a pattern kind of like a leathery texture, or texture kind of like some type of a granite or stone or something like that. Probably also noticed too, I just got it all over my fingers. That's okay. This stuff is water soluble. Kind of got it on my fingers on purpose. Wanted to show you. It's very, very easy to get this stuff off. It's water soluble, and it just wipes right off while it's still wet. If you let it dry though, stuff's tough as nails. That's pretty much all there is to it. For cleanup, got a little bit of water over here. Just like I said, it just wipes off. Nothing to it. And you know what, I think I'm going to grab a plastic bag and show you how to do the technique of crunched up plastic bag and let you see what that looks like, because that's kind of neat. Okay, we're back. I went ahead and roller coated these other two real quick. And I'm going to do one pair with just the roller itself, and I'm going to do another pair with the plastic bag technique so you can kind of see the difference. A lot of my customers will build a pair of speakers and they'll roll the whole thing in Durtex, and then you can go over and just do the pressed plastic bag straight across the whole thing and then paint it, and it gives it a really neat look. I don't know if you can really tell from the angle this is on. I'll try to tilt this up a little bit so you can see, but it gives it a look very much like a piece of stone or something, and it was just that easy to do. I did a whole kitchen countertop in this stuff one time and coated it all in Durtex, pressed plastic bags down in it, did a second coat, then went behind it with different colors to make it look like a piece of granite, and really, I mean, just made it look like just like stone, and then put a food grade clear coat over it, and it's held up great. Another cool thing about Durtex, if you do chip it or bang it or knock a dent out of it or something, you can just take your paintbrush and a little bit of it, daub it back on there and fill it back in, and it's good as new. But tough stuff. It's hard to ding that stuff off, hard to knock it off, and it'll dry in a few hours, and if you want, you can put another coat on, or we can just take the whole thing and just paint it any color you want. It holds paint really well. So if you're doing some DIY projects, you want to kind of a cheap, down and dirty way to finish the speakers out, the old Durtex works great. All right, when this gets dry, we'll start mounting crossover parts. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. We are right back to crossover assembly. We're about to start that again, and it's been a long day. It's been a busy day. I've answered 65 emails and a whole bunch of posts on YouTube and Audio Circle. So I've spent a lot of the day answering questions. I appreciate all the questions, and I'm going to hit some of the questions that I've been getting over and over and over during the assembly process. So we're going to do that. And yes, I'm wearing an old pullover from the 80s because I'll work in anything, and t-shirts and shorts is pretty much me year round unless it gets a little chilly, and then I'll throw on an old pullover and some sweatpants. Now, we made a couple of crossover boards, and why did I make 4 of them? Because it takes the same amount of time to make 4 of them as it does to make 2 of them. We coated them in Durtex, and this is the Durtex finish just right off of the roller. It's just kind of a nice textured finish, kind of an eggshell look. This one we did the pressed plastic bag technique into it. It has kind of a look of stone, or maybe kind of a leathery look. So that's kind of cool. Something to keep in mind if you're playing with Durtex. I'm going to use some of these. Oh, and I'm not going to make a whole bunch of these and send them out with the kits, because I don't have time to make hundreds of these things. But I will try and scan one of them and print it off, and then you guys can copy it, because it's real easy to make. Okay, let's get right into putting the crossover on the board. So we've got all the holes drilled, and like I showed you before, some of these holes are drilled for the screws, and I'll try to throw in some of these. These are kind of a drywall screw. They're a rough coarse thread, and it's easy for you to just drive that straight into the MDF. Hopefully these won't stick out the bottom. You know, I may have to, these are going to be too long. I'm going to have to find you some shorter ones. I measured the cabinet thickness on these, and they're only 5/8 of an inch thick. So yeah, not even 3/4 of an inch thick. They're pretty flimsy. So I'm going to have to find you some shorter screws. I'll throw some of those in, and let's get right to it. This was the woofer network. I just screwed the parts together, is just going to fit right there on the board, and we're going to zip tie this stuff on there. I usually start with the one inductor that's the biggest and the heaviest, and just screw it right to the board. While I'm doing this, I'll take some of these questions that I keep getting. One that I've gotten over and over is can I send you the speakers and you just do them turnkey? No. As much fun as this is, I don't have time to just do this all day, and I really don't have a production crew set up to just put crossovers together. If I did, it would get a lot more expensive than just selling you the parts. The way I'm set up, I can pull parts and put them in a box and ship them pretty easily, and I don't have to stock and warehouse a lot of things that would take a lot of time. I don't stock and warehouse cabinets. I'd have to warehouse a lot of cabinets if I did that. When I just sell kits, it's just a kit, and you guys get to go out there and build the cabinets on your own, and you get to have the fun of doing all that yourself. I can't afford to stock all the different finishes and cabinets, and my warehouse space would get huge if I started doing that. So I try to limit what I do and kind of budget my time to design work, preferably. Design work is a lot of fun, and doing upgrades is fun, but I don't have time to do a lot of assembly work. Now, that being said, there are guys out there that are our customers, and we have a great customer base. We have the friendliest, most warm-hearted customers out there that do DIY kits, and they're all over the country. They're in your area, I'm sure. And maybe some of those guys can get together with you, and you guys can do all this together. Do it as a project and have fun with it. And maybe a whole bunch of you guys in one area can do it and have fun with it. If you don't feel like you want to really tackle this thing on your own, even after watching the videos and me showing you how easy it is, then post in our forum at Audio Circle and say, this is who I am, I'm in this area, and this is what I'd like to do. Maybe some of you guys would like to do this with me. We may have customers in your area that'll be glad to help you out. There's all of the woofer circuit, by the way. Just like that, we've connected it all to the board. Now I'm about to start on the tweeter circuit. I use smaller zip ties for smaller parts, and I use bigger zip ties for bigger parts. And then when I get through, I can go back over some of this and put some hot glue all around it and really seal these things and get them all stuck to the board really well. And that works really well. Another question I've been asked a lot is about the no-res. Does the no-res take up airspace? Does it change the volume of the box? And the answer is no. No, it doesn't change the volume of the box. Now, how is that? Well, the damper, the thick layer, it's a 70 mil thick damper, does take up some airspace. It's physically going to take up space. But anytime you add a foam layer to something, or you add foam, that foam is open cell foam, so air passes through and around the foam, but it slows down the airflow in the box and makes the box act as if it is a bigger box. So when you combine the two, you have a damper that's taking up some airspace, you have a foam layer that's giving back airspace. In the end, it's pretty neutral. When we align this stuff with no-res and take another impedance sweep, typically the tuning frequency of it is pretty close to right where it was. So it really doesn't change the airspace too much. It's pretty neutral in that regard. We are just about to be finished with this one, and I'll probably just cut, and so you don't have to watch me do another one just like this. Oh, I will tell you before I do the other one, the way I do the other one is I've already assembled this one, and I used it to mark the spots. So I have all the spots marked, and now I get to put the other ones, all the other ones on. So now what I'll do is just zip all the parts to the board, and they're all where they're supposed to be, and then I'll go in and run the wiring around and twist them together. So I'm going to do that on this one now, and so I'm going to cut, and we'll come right back. I'll have both of these done, and then we're going to go right to hooking up the wiring. Okay guys, welcome back. While we were gone, I got the other network fully assembled. Also, I noticed on the last segment I forgot to turn on my additional room light that kind of helps lighten things up, so hopefully that last segment wasn't too dark, but maybe you guys can live with it. Okay, notice one thing you haven't seen yet is any soldering take place. We haven't done any soldering up until now. All of this stuff was point-to-point wired. It's all twisted together. You're actually twisting the wires together. That's your connection. The solder is not your connection. The solder just basically holds the connection together. So now we're going to do some soldering. And I like this old, it's an old Sears soldering iron. It doesn't use your regular soldering tips. This thing is pretty hot, gets a job done quick, and you get off it. And that's the best way sometimes to do the soldering, is just get on it quick, get it hot, get off of it. Don't linger around on it for too long. And whoo, got my finger on it there. And I mean, just like that, it's that easy. It's just as long as it takes. I usually start up here at the tip and just go down this one, and we're just getting a little solder on the tip so that you have solder contact there, and then you're touching it to it, and then you're just going right down it and soldering it together. And in just a couple of seconds we'll be through with this network. And just like that, all the joints have been soldered. We go to the second network. I know people say, oh man, soldering, that's hard, I don't want to have to do any soldering, I don't know how to solder. Man, soldering is easy. You just feed that solder onto it and just run right down the connections. Just as easy as that. 2 more to go. And again, at that time I didn't have much solder on the tip. It took a little longer. If you get a little solder there on the tip, it goes a little faster. Lifting it up off the board a little bit. You don't want to just cram it right onto the board. And sometimes it's better to get underneath it and you get a little heat up in it. And then just go right down it. And that's all she wrote. Just that easy. Next, we've got to figure out exactly what length wires we need to fit in the box. Before I get there, I want to answer one other question about these drivers. A lot of you guys saw the metal frames. It's just a stamped steel frame. It's the cheapest frame you can make, and said, wow, that's a lot of ringing. What about damping that frame? And that's a good thought. That's a good question. You can take little strips of dynamite or even some type of clay or something like that. You can put a lot of things on the back side of this and damp that ringing out, and it will definitely make a difference. When this thing excites this frame, it will ring, and damping that out is a good idea. It's real cheap and it's real easy. Okay, how do we figure out what lengths of wires we're going to need? So this thing is going to be in the bottom of the cabinet just like this. So we're going to have to figure out how long we need wires running to and from. So what I do is we provide this really high-end wire. It's 4/9 pure copper in polyethylene, and it's solid core, so it's super easy to work with. And yeah, I've got about 20,000 feet of each of it and a spool down here at my feet. So we're going to have wire running to the network from the tube connectors, and the tube connector is going to be right here on the back, and you want a little slack there so you got a little bit to work with, and cut you off a piece. What you guys will get is a little spool of this stuff, and that's going to be the length of wire we're going to use that's running to the crossover. Then we're going to have 2 positives coming off. We're going to have a positive that's going to come off here, and it's going to come out over there. It's going to go right to the woofer, and we want a little bit of slack so we can work with it there. So there's how much we need going to the woofer. And at the same time, I always cut them for both speakers. There we go. There's the woofer. And then we're going to need a positive that's coming off of this piece here, and it's going to go up there to the tweeter. So it's going to come up through the box, and it's going to go to the tweeter. And we still need it to hang out of the box a little bit because we're going to have it out of the box when we solder it to it. So we're going to need about that much for the tweeter. There's our positives to the tweeter. Now in this design, the polarities get reversed, so we have to remember when we connect it to the tweeter, this red one is going to go to the negative, and the white one, which is the negative, is going to go to the positive terminal on the tweeter. So there's the ones for our tweeters. Now, what I like to do on the negatives is I like to make a continuous run from wherever it's going all the way back to the tube connector. So let's say I've got a negative that I'm going to put on the woofer, and on the woofer it's going to go from here straight to this point right here. This is a return, and what I want to do is go from there. Let's see how I want to do that. I want to go just to there. I think I just want to go from right there and right there only, and the reason being is I'm going to catch it with a negative on the tweeter, and it's going to go all the way back. So we're just going to need that much right there going to the woofer, and it will get a path back to the negative, but it's going to go a little different way. What we're going to do is we're going to come from the tweeter. So we're going to come from the tweeter, we're going to come down, and we're going to catch that same leg right there where the woofer left off. We're going to catch it there, and then we're going to come over here and catch this cap that's in shunt. We're going to catch it here, and then we're going to go back to the negative on the tube connector. So what I'm going to have is basically one wire that's continuous from the driver all the way back to the tube connector, and it's just going to have a little piece cut out where it goes back to the other end. We're just going to have a little piece cut out where it attaches. So let's get a little room here. I like to hook all the positives up first, and then that way it kind of gives us lengths of wire. So I'm going to pause for a minute. We're going to go get some heat shrink ready, and we're going to put this thing together. Okay, back again. I've got all my heat shrink cut. I've assembled the positive legs on this one here, and now I'm going to show you how to assemble a little of the wiring on this one. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut or strip off the end of the wire there for the input. This is the positive input on it right here. What I'm going to do is latch that on there and twist it on, just like that. Make good contact. Again, the contact itself is the wire being twisted on. That's your connection. Solid twist of them together. The solder is just basically holding those two together. Positive going to the woofer coming off of the network is next. And again, I like to strip about that much off. This is a 16 gauge solid core wire, so any stripper you want to find out there that handles 16 gauge will strip it right off, and it won't damage the wire. You just kind of get it started by hand. Get another pair of pliers on it there and give it a good twist. Get it nice and solid. Got a little extra at the end there, just twist it around it. Make it a good solid connection. Alright, and then the next one is the tweeter. This is the wire going up to the tweeter. It's a positive wire, but again, we're going to flip the polarity, so it's going to actually go to the negative on the tweeter. Whoop, it took off on me. And put it right there. Twist it on. I know you guys think this is some mystical, hard to do type of deal, point to point wiring, but man, it's not hard at all. It's pretty easy. Alright, there's all three wires twisted on. You know what, I'm going to tighten that one up a little right there. And then the last thing we do is solder them all on. So, again, you want to get the gun hot. Takes a little bit, in this case, a few seconds to get it hot. Clean the tip just a little. I'm going to feed a little bit of solder onto it. Make sure there's some solder on the tip. And then we're going to get right to it. We're going to solder it right on. Just feed that solder right on it. Let the solder be the bond that holds it together. And if you're wondering, solder is going to come in the kit. So you don't have to go out and buy solder. You get a good quality solder, Comes in the kit, so you have everything you need to put it together. And then last, this one I'm going to twist it a little more at the bottom here. It's got a little leg on the bottom there that's still hanging out. Let's give it a little more twist there at the bottom. Make a good solid connection. That looks good. And don't worry if it takes you a little longer than it just did for me. I do these all the time, so it gets a little repetitious. I can fly right through it. No big deal. Now, heat shrink. I've cut some heat shrink. What we're going to do on the heat shrink is just drop that down on each one. We're going to heat this up later when we got all the white ones on. We're going to heat them all up at once. That seals the connection. We're not worried about sealing the connections between these types of components here. These are all tinned wires. There's nothing there to oxidize. There's no bare copper. When you solder on something like this that's got a pure high purity copper end, you want to seal it with heat shrink so that it's never exposed to the air and it keeps it from oxidizing. Okay, I had to pause it there for a second because I had to sneeze. Got that behind me now. Next is going to be the negative wires. We're going to start with the tweeters. I'm going to start here. I'm going to run down and I'm going to make a connection right here. So right there is going to be my connection point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm just going to strip insulation right out of the middle of it there. I'm going to put a little cut there and a little cut right there. Make sure I get that one all the way through. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the little X-Acto knife there and I'm just going to go right along the edge of it there and just slice off a little section of the insulation. Since it's polyethylene, it's real easy to do that with. It'd be a lot tougher if it was PVC and it'd be a mess and it'd be everywhere, all that good stuff. So there we go. We've just cut out a piece of the insulation. And it's going to get twisted on right here. So we're going to get it up here on this resistor. So it's catching the return leg on the resistor, but I didn't have to put another break in the wire. I really didn't want to put another break in the wire. You want to minimize all the breaks and connections in the wires that you can. You don't want it just pieced together with a bunch of bits and pieces. So basically what we have here is this is going to go to the positive on the tweeter, but it came back and it caught that resistor right there, and then it's going to go on back to the rest. So we're hooking it there, and I'm going to go ahead and solder it. And then it's going to go and it's going to catch the negative that's also going to be the negative on the woofer. This gun takes a few seconds to heat up. You can tell when it starts melting solder that it's ready to go. And then put it underneath the wiring and feed solder onto it. There we go. A nice good solder pool there. Okay, so it's going to go from there to right here, and then we're going to do it again. We're going to put a little cut, and we're going to back off of it a little further there, about the same distance. Put another little cut, and we're going to strip that wire out. Also, we're giving the last one that I just did a little bit of time to cool. So once it gets cool, then I can slide a little heat shrink down over it and seal that connection. We want to be able to seal that connection also. And grab it with a little pair of pliers maybe. Pull that little insulation right off of there. There it goes. Okay. Use this heat shrink. I'm going to slide it down. You always have to remember to put that heat shrink on first. If you solder this connection on, you're never going to get that heat shrink on. So you got to kind of think ahead of what you're doing there. Now, this one can get twisted on, but there's another piece that's going to get twisted onto it too. and that's this one that's coming up to the woofer. So this one and this one are going to be the woofer negative and positive. So we're going to twist it on there too. So we got a little threesome going on here. So we had one break in the wire basically, and it's the break on the woofer circuit. If I have my rathers, do I put a break in the wire on the woofer circuit, or do I put a break in the wire on the tweeter circuit? I'd rather put the break on the woofer circuit. The tweeter circuit is a little more delicate. I'd rather it be the more continuous wire going all the way back to the tube connectors. So, cleaning the soldering tip a little bit again. As you can see, we've got quite a bit twisted together there. We're going to have to get a little more heat into it because we've got 3 wires we're soldering together at the same time. So, get a little heat on it, get a little solder on your tip. It's going to take a few seconds to really get some heat up into the wire. What you're doing is you're basically heating up the wire that you're going to solder to, and then you're feeding solder onto the wire. So it's going to take a little longer, and there it goes. Solder is now feeding onto the wire. I know you probably can't see it so much because my hand is in the way, but there you go. Nice clean solder contact. And then when that cools, we can slide the last piece of heat shrink down on it, and that crossover is done. So we'll have these two are going to go to the woofer. So what I do is I'll twist these together. This is leads go into the woofer. We're going to have these two go into the tweeter. So twist these together. And the twisting action actually allows the wire to become a little bit of a filter. And it will filter RF and EMI, rather than it just being just a bare wire. When you have 2 wires run next to each other like that, sometimes you're making a little bit of an antenna. Now, remember, I have to put the heat shrink on this one before I twist it together, or I won't be able to twist it together. Or I won't be able to get the heat shrink on because it's already twisted together. So, these are going to be the wires that go to the tube connectors. That was wiring the whole crossover. It was that easy. I got one more here to go put the white ones on, and then we get to mount it inside the enclosure. Okay, both networks are assembled. All the wires are twisted together. We have going to the woofer, going to the tweeter, going to the tube connectors in the back. Last thing we need to do is heat shrink all these connections. So I just use a heat gun, turn it on low setting, get that thing right up on that heat shrink, and just let it seal those connections. That'll just help keep any of that wire from ever oxidizing. While I'm doing this, I'll take a couple more of those questions. I've had some guys that have asked about upgrading the drivers. Since that woofer's so horrible and it's on a metal frame and it rings and blah blah blah, how about if we just upgrade the woofer? Well, first of all, you'd have to find a woofer that fits the same frame. Basically, it has the same frame, or that fits the same hole. Chances of you finding a woofer that fits exactly into that hole, pretty slim. Chances of finding a woofer that fits that exact same hole and that the small parameters are such that it needs that exact airspace, that's pretty much impossible. So, and if you could find a woofer that was an exact fit, the frequency response would of course be very different than the metal cone woofer. We wouldn't have to be using that same circuit. We wouldn't have to be controlling the breakup in the cone. So obviously the network would have to be completely different. So at that point, you're building a whole new speaker and you're only using a tweeter. I mean, might as well start over with a kit. You know, once you start replacing drivers, it just doesn't make any sense. You're not upgrading that speaker anymore. And if you want to get so far as to upgrading the drivers, just build one of our kits. It'd be cheaper in the long run than building something new and custom, and probably about 10 times better in quality, because we've already spent all the time and money and energy to create it to start with, and to make it is really, really, really good. That's it right there. All of this is together, it's all done. that's all there was to it. Building the whole network, we just point to point wired a couple. You got to watch the whole process from beginning to end. That was easy. Next is going to be mounting these in the bottom of the box. We're going to screw it right into the floor. Before I do that, I'm going to go find some new screws. These screws are going to be a little bit too long because normally they're what I use for cabinets that are 3/4 inch. That's going to stick out a little far, 5/8 of an inch thick cabinet like what these have. It's just not going to do it. I'm going to have to find a few shorter screws, and then we'll get these mounted, wire it all up, mount it to the connectors in the back. We're going to parallel the tube connectors down to these old connectors. That way you could use either one, and we'll get these buttoned up and give them a listen. That's it for now, and hopefully we can get all this done for next week's episode. If this really ran too long and I have to break it up, then I'll break it up, but I'll do what I can to try and keep this all in one piece. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the comment section. I appreciate all you guys viewing. Thanks a lot.